Okay. Hi, Philippe. Thank you so much for joining me
Hi.
here. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. For anyone that's watching this video, just so you know, the different numbers that are beneath both mine and Philippe's name, that's acting as a ranking system. On top of that, there's another 2 spots inside the room right now. So if someone wants to participate as a speaker, just simply click the Start Speaking button to fill up those 2 spots. And past that, if there were other people in the room, I would lay out some ground rules, such as like not having any personal attacks on people. But since right now it's just me and you, I don't think we need to worry about that. So what I'll do is I'll start off with the first question, Philippe. Would you mind just giving anyone who listens to this video now or in the future just a quick background about yourself, where you're located, your religion and your ethnicity, just a brief background so people know.
Okay. I'll start in the reverse order. I am originally, my parents are Moroccan Jews, Berber in origin. They fled in the 60s to Canada, where I grew up, and I moved to Israel a few years ago. Right now I'm in LA speaking to you, but I moved to Israel a number of years ago. I feel Israeli more than anything. I am an attorney by profession, but I write for the Times of Israel, and I'm quite active in matters of Israel advocacy. And the reason being is that I think if the lies, and I think a lot of them are lies about Israel out there are believed, there's no reason or no justification to make peace with Israel. So I think it's important to get the truth out there so that passions can be tempered.
Great.
Progress can be made. That's my story.
Great. Very nice. So I guess then that will lead me into my first question. We'll kind of ease into it. A few weeks back, when the ceasefire occurred between Israelis and Palestinians, and that was brokered, what was your feelings about that? Were you in favor of it, or not so much? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I can. Nobody wants war, and I was there when the rockets were, reaching Tel Aviv. It was very scary. That said, I was not in favor of the ceasefire. I think the choice to kill Jabari was calculated and was a risky choice. It was obvious there would be a response. Once Israel starts to actually fight terror groups like Hamas, it's very important, especially in the Middle East, that it gets the job done and that it sends a clear message. So once the war was started, I wanted Israel to have a greater impact, and I can explain that if you want. So I was against the ceasefire. I think overall, the ceasefire was a diplomatic victory for Hamas. On paper, they're now an equal party to Israel in that agreement. They came out as having attacked Tel Aviv relatively unscathed, if you compare to what Israel used to do in the past. They've attacked Jerusalem. They were able to fire 200 rockets on the last day of the attack, and they were able to withstand 8 days, 10 days of pounding, and still fire rockets, and still have their rallies. And they were greeting foreign diplomats while it was going on. I think overall, their goodwill was enhanced by this. And in the Middle East, perception is vital. The reason we have war is false perceptions. And when you have conflict like this, it's very important that a deterrent effect is created. Because now what comes across to Iran and Hezbollah is that Israel has a hard time because of diplomatic pressure, even dealing with very small Hamas.
Right.
And I think that's very dangerous.
Great.
Not everybody agrees with me, but that's mine.
Great. So what I'd like to then ask you, you obviously writing for the Times of Israel, have a pro-Israeli point of view. I wanted to ask you, what is your take on the Palestinians and the life they live? Do they live it from your point of view? Do they live in a free society? And whatever restrictions that they're saying they're living through, do you think that it is caused by partly the Israeli government, partly the Palestinian authorities? Can you go into that matter, please?
Yes, and the answer is yes to everything. Nobody reasonable would deny that Palestinians are going through an easy time. That said, I don't think they're the ultimate victims like they'd like to present themselves as. The Palestinians, like every other people, have agency over their future and decisions. And I think as long as we let Israel be targeted with all these accusations and be treated like the only grown-up in the room, the Palestinians are not going to develop the kind of accountability that they need to properly govern themselves. And I do think the Palestinians should govern themselves. I don't want Israel to govern the Palestinians. But to say that Palestinians also is a bit problematic now because it ignores the very big schism between Gaza and the West Bank. Palestinians in Gaza who were subject to this battle between Hamas and Israel are not occupied, quote unquote. The Israelis are not in Gaza since 2005. The Rafah opening with Egypt has been almost completely normalized. Tourists can come in and out, diplomats come in and out. Israel is providing them with electricity, water, trucks, but there's no Israeli soldiers on the ground. There's no settlers there. There's an embargo for West, which is obviously having little to no sense. So, if you can take those nuances into consideration, yes, the Palestinians suffer. But in every case, not denying that there's Israeli excesses and mistakes, Israelis that don't behave properly, Israeli soldiers. But I think we have to address the fact that Palestinians in Gaza are entirely independent. And Palestinians in the West Bank, 96% of them live under their own elected leaders, and they have for a very long time. I think we're talking about 18 years for some of them, 15 for some of them. It's important that the Palestinians take responsibility for those parts of their lives that they can improve for themselves, and for the suffering that they bring upon themselves by choosing to resort to violence instead of accepting Israeli peace offers, offering counter offers. I think there's been immense progress in the West Bank. I don't think most Palestinians in the West Bank now have nearly as difficult a life as they did 10 years ago under Arafat. In 2002, the Passover massacre happened. There was a lot of violence in the West Bank. There were gangs running the streets. It was a different situation. Now, because of leaders they have, more cooperation with Israel, things improve. Now, can Israel do that? Of course. Can Israel make their lives better? Yes, I think it still can. Ultimately, I think because Palestinians overwhelmingly live to differing extents under their own elected leaders, they have to also take responsibility for what they can improve in their lives. As a reflex, it's a healthy reflex for any political entity to look at itself first.
Okay, great. So I guess then from there, an interesting, follow-up question would be, so you're saying they should be held responsible for their actions, of course, in terms of what, the Israeli, so in terms of what, the Israeli government, is doing right now, like, do you think, for example, the idea of building, these settlements, because one thing that you mentioned is that there's these settlers, and you're saying that they're not there. First off, are Israeli settlers considered the same people that are living inside the really nice established settlements? Are those considered the same exact people in Israel? Or because I wanted to ask you what your opinion is on the settlement buildings that have been built near the West Bank and on what's they consider Palestinian lands. Like, do you think that is do you think that should continue going on? Or no?
That's a broad question. It's an important. First, to clarify, I said there's no settlers in Gaza. There have not been any Jewish settlers or Israeli residents living in Gaza, Israeli citizens living in Gaza, since 2005. The Israeli government removed them all. I don't know if you were paying attention back then. It was a very difficult process in Israel. Their homes were destroyed. The cemeteries were uprooted because the Palestinians couldn't contemplate having Israelis buried in their territory. Israel took away every single crumb of its presence from Gaza, except for greenhouses that could have served to help the economy. Unfortunately, the Palestinians came in and the first thing they did is destroy those greenhouses, use the equipment to make rockets. But there are no settlers in Gaza. That did not lead to peace, as we know. It led to war. It was seen as an encouragement of violence. It was seen as retreating after violence. That's one aspect. To reduce the conflict in settlements is, I think, just illogical in view of the evidence. Now, to take it one further, there are over 1.5 million Arabs living in Israel. I don't see why Palestinians who want to have a democratic state, so they say, would not offer citizenship to the 300,000 Israelis living in the West Bank. The villages, were they to become Palestinian, would be an immense boon to their economy.
Becoming Israeli citizens, you're saying?
Palestinian. No. What Palestinians would not offer Israeli settlers in the West Bank to become Palestinian citizens, and thereby keep settlements as part of the future Palestine. A vast number of those Israelis would leave. I imagine a number would stay. And I think it would be a great asset to Palestinians. And that would also prove peace and coexistence is possible. The only reason the settlements are a very real issue is because the Palestinians cannot contemplate keeping Israelis within their future state. If they were able to contemplate keeping Israelis in their future state, they could offer for those villages, settlements, to become Palestinian villages, and Israeli Jews to stay there. But they won't. They want everybody out. They want their country to be 100% free of Jews. And that's what makes the settlements a big problem. That said,
yeah.
I don't think that, but I want to nuance. That said, once Israel has committed itself to this agreement and the roadmap, what Israel said is its policy, what Netanyahu said is its policy of two states, and considering the fact that the Palestinians cannot fathom peace without ethnically cleansing every Jew from the West Bank, Israel should not be building more settlements. It is not helping in any way. Or it should declare that it has no interest in seeking peace with the Palestinian Authority. But there needs to be some coherence.
Right.
But overwhelmingly, I don't think the settlements are the problem.
Okay. So my question to you that has kind of been bugging me is like, if these first off, these settlements are being built according, to multiple sources, by a lot of the radical, like, what people consider, they're funded by, like, the Zionist individuals within Israel. And my question to you is...
Almost everybody in Israel is Zionist. We have a delay. I said almost everybody in Israel is a Zionist. I think there's a lot of nonsense going on about what that word means. I don't think many people use it as a kind of insult. They don't even know what it means. I'm a proud Zionist. I think every liberal should be a proud Zionist. I'm happy to explain it. I'll let you finish your question.
Yeah. So my question just is like, if they're going to build these really nice, elaborate settlements, and if Israel wants peace inside of their country and within these occupied, Palestinian lands, why aren't they allowing? Granted, some Palestinians have no desire to live inside of these settlements, but why don't the Israelis allow Palestinians to live inside of these nice settlements? Why wouldn't they allow them to?
Okay, a lot of things said. I have to take issue with an underlying assumption in your question.
Yeah.
You said occupied Palestinian land. It is occupied Palestinian land only in the opinion of Palestinians and people who support their cause. Legally speaking, it's disputed land, or it was until the UN kind of made it a more complex issue recently. The Security Council resolution that's the most relevant is 242, and it allows Israel to retain territory in the West Bank and Gaza for security purposes. That's a peace deal. The Oslo agreements signed between Israel and the Palestinians allows Israel to build settlements. So it's not exactly occupied Palestinian land 100%. There's never been a Palestine in history. Before this was occupied by Israel, it was occupied by Jordan. Before that it was British. Before that it was Turkish for a very long time. Never been a Palestinian state. What people are really saying is, we want this to become a Palestinian state. and the language that's used to enforce that position is by Palestinian land. That's not true. It is land that's controlled jointly by the Palestinians in Israel, and that legally the status of which has to be determined between the parties. Now, that said, there are no big settlements that are being built recently. What you've heard of is a permit for the exploratory first stages of building 3,000 units between Jerusalem and a big settlement called Malach. That's going on, permission to build. You mentioned that the settlements are elaborate or very luxurious. It's not really the case. The ideological settlements, the one that people oppose the most, are very poor, and it's young people, families living in caravans. They don't even have running water. The ones that you see that are much more established, that are big, Israel would like to keep in and swap with the Palestinians. Territory within Israel is a problem. Palestinians have to live there if they're not Israeli citizens. Israeli citizens, generally speaking, are allowed to live there. What else can I say? And a lot of the Palestinian towns are much more well off than these settlements. They're much richer, and some places in the West Bank are tragically poor, but some places in Israel are tragically poor. Not as poor, but I don't know that Israel is to blame for that.
Right. Okay.
It might be in certain cases, but generally I don't think so.
No, of course.
You go to Ramallah or Hebron, they're very, very, very rich people and very, very big houses, and Nablus as well. Nobody who lives in those houses would be interested in living in the settlements. Settlements are in the front because the Palestinians don't want Jews to the future state, and they feel like these territories are going to be kept by Israel pursuant to any peace deal. I think the solution to that, and a lot of professors have written about this, is to offer those settlers basically Israeli citizenship and keep their territories. If they want to leave, they can leave. But it diffuses this whole artificial issue of settlement. If there are 1.6 million Arabs living in Israel, or more, there can be 300,000 Israelis living in a future state of Palestine.
Right. Okay. So you're saying that there is definitely a trade-off where there are settlers that want to live inside of these territories, but do those and I want to introduce Michael. Since I'm acting more as a moderator, Michael, how are you? And did you have a point that you wanted to respond to from Philippe?
Yes, actually, I wanted to add something. And Philippe, you and I know.
Wait, can I just clarify something? I don't think. Sorry.
Yeah. What's?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to add in, Max. Your question assumes or implies that the conflict is about land. The conflict is really not about land. Borders can be settled. You saw, as Philippe pointed out, Israel left Gaza. The conflict at its source has been, for the past 60-plus years, about the Palestinian refusal to accept living in peace alongside a Jewish state of Israel. It's not about whether 3,000 apartments are going to be built in land that even the Palestinians agreed would stay as part of the Jewish state. The conflict is about coexistence or the lack thereof.
Right. Okay. And so, I mean, point well accepted. I just
I agree with Michael.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
If I can elaborate, I agree with Michael, and that's what I was trying to put to that by highlighting the situation. It's a bit absurd of the settlements. Everybody automatically confronts Israel about the settlements, with some justification, but ultimately it would not be necessary.
Go ahead, Michael. Were you going to respond?
And I do agree that I think.
Yes.
So, I was going to say, not even necessarily whether the Israeli settlers who live out in the West Bank now will even be accepted in a Palestinian state. We're talking about the lack of a Palestinian acceptance of living in peace alongside a state of the Jewish people, regardless of whether there are any Jews in that Palestinian state or not.
So can I ask you and
But I think they're related.
Okay.
Of course.
Great. So can I want to ask you guys a question, just because, I think you both are coming, obviously I know, Philippe, from speaking to you, you're coming from the pro-Palestinian end, and I want to keep this conversation objective. I want to throw some other interesting points out there, but I'm going to relay an interesting, question. So with that all being said, you don't constantly hear it in the media, but there's an underlying message where it's like, is there apartheid occurring? And so what I wanted to ask you, inside of Israel, with this whole suggestion of there being, an apartheid taking place inside of Israel, do you think, I hear what you're saying, where it's Palestinians that do not want to accept the Jewish people and them having a right to live in a state, in their own country with their own name, and that makes sense. What I was also going to say, though, is do you think that it works both ways, where Israel is not nearly as accepting of the Palestinian people potentially having their own state, when they do have a lot of different restrictions between both, like, separate roads for them to drive on, and different things such as that. Also, like, can you elaborate on this whole 25-foot cement wall that's being built? I mean, do you guys see at all? Maybe there's another angle to it where it's like,
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sure you guys understand what I'm saying. Could you guys elaborate on that?
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I start?
Go ahead, Philippe.
Okay. You said a lot of things. I think the most important thing to answer, first of all, for everybody listening, is that what you said now is popular, accepted wisdom, except that it's completely libel. It is absolutely false to be called that. There is absolutely no semblance of apartheid anywhere in Israel. If anything, the apartheid is from the other side, and I'll explain. Israel is the only country in the Middle East where Arabs have full democratic rights. Israel is the only country in the Middle East integrated Palestinians and treats them as equals. To speak of apartheid is so absurd that I don't even want to defend Israel against this accusation, but I have to. I invite your readers, your listeners, to go read my recent articles. I did 2 profiles of very active Arab Israelis on the Times of Israel, and they speak. They can address the whole apartheid issue. Needless to say, I'll give you an example of that. Israel recently put an ex-president of the state, the highest official, in prison for criminal charges in the world, and apartheid doesn't mean anything anymore. Israel is the only country that gives Palestinian Israelis full rights under the law. Now, full equal rights, democratic rights under the law. Their elected politicians are much more critical of Israel than they would be in any other country. Israel is the only place where Arabs have full freedom and equality. Period. The apartheid thing is a slander to justify jihad. That's all it is. It is a lie, period. That's Israel. And you talked about the wall and you talked about the territories. There's also not apartheid. The separation between Israel and the territories has nothing to do with race, religion, color, creed, any of that. It has to do with citizenship. The territories are administered by Israel and the Palestinians jointly, different responsibilities. Because of relentless suicide bombings, where I'm sure Mike might even know people, I know people who were victims. Every day Israelis report terror attacks. The Israeli left center, not the right wing, decided to put up a fence. 90% of it is a fence, chain link fence. Some parts are a concrete wall to stop snipers from shooting at cars of civilians. They decided to put up a wall after years of relentless terror attacks. Once that was done, the terror attacks dropped. It has nothing to do with apartheid or oppression or separation. And if Israel is going to withdraw from these territories, it is perfectly entitled to put a wall or a fence where it thinks border will. And the Supreme Court has made sure that Israel doesn't get greedy and doesn't grab land that it would probably be entitled to under a negotiated settlement.
Great.
Finally, we spoke about bypass roads, where only Israelis, not Jews, Israelis, that means Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis, are allowed to drive. Those roads were built because Palestinians were sniping and attacking cars that were going through populated areas with Israelis. So those roads had to be built. And they're built for security reasons. Every single thing I listed, the wall, the different roads, the fence, security measures, are a reaction to Palestinian terrorism. And none of it is based on race, creed, or discrimination. Zero.
Okay, great. Michael, do you want to respond to that, please?
Well, basically, Philippe is completely right on the facts, of course. Now, I don't live in Israel. I'm in California, in the San Francisco area. Anybody who wants to charge that Israel is apartheid would have to explain how we had a Muslim Bedouin Arab, a very good diplomat by the name of Ishmael Kaldi, serve for 4 years as Deputy Consul General for the State of Israel, based in San Francisco. I had the pleasure and honor of meeting him several times. He still serves as a diplomat for Israel in other settings. And anybody who has been to Israel to travel realizes you go down the streets, you go to see any public facility, you ride the buses, you go into any hospital, you walk onto any university campus, and you immediately know that the apartheid lie is exactly that. It is a big lie. It is part of the incessant anti-Israel propaganda, and it is really promoted by those who are the actual enemies of peace. The people who are spouting this lie are the same people who are vociferously opposing peace between a Jewish state of Israel and its Arab neighbors. They are promoting instead the fictitious one-state solution whose goal is to eliminate Israel.
Great. So I'd like to bring up a very interesting question. I appreciate you guys giving me that, perspective on that. Those are, counter arguments to what the other side is saying, and I wish there was someone inside the room, like there was, an hour ago, Philippe, that would, then go and try and, rebuttal on that point. But what I'll do is I'll move into.
Hold up. This is not opinion.
So what I want to do is I want to move into an interesting question that I've been asking each person that's been participating on Vonvo, and that is this: you have individuals on the Israeli side that seem to have radical and extreme views, and then you have individuals on the Palestinian end that have radical extreme views. And I speak to Israelis and I've spoken to Palestinians over the past 3 weeks that are all about, I want peace. I'm sick and tired of this, like continuing. So I hear that from the middle, from the ordinary citizen, and I ask both of you, is this crisis, this conflict, at least present day, I don't want to go back 4,000 years, I don't want to go back 50 years, right now, present day, is this conflict being just, continue to escalate because of issues between, between minority populations on each side that are driving this crisis continually? Is that an argument to be made?
Philippe, you want to take it first?
I'll go. The extremists can always poison the water. I think it is a fallacy to create that equivalency right now between a democratically elected government of Israel, which might be more right-wing than some people like, but it's democratically elected, and the Palestinian authorities, because there's two of them. In Israel, there's extremists, and generally they're marginal, and they're dealt with as extremists. Palestinians in Gaza are ruled by extremists, and in the West Bank, they're ruled by, let's be generous and call them former extremists. The present government of the West Bank is actually moderate in its actions, not its declarations. It has been reigning in terror and control. But there are terror groups that are directly affiliated with this government. It still celebrates suicide bombers by naming daycare centers and summer camps after suicide bombers. It just named a sports center or a sports tournament after a suicide bomber and gave out awards, and the suicide bomber's brother was there. It still celebrates murder, even though they're the moderate one. In Gaza, the Palestinian government is extremist. They're the equivalent of fascists or Nazis, and the reason I say this is not an exaggeration, because their charter calls for the killing, charter of Hamas, the official founding document of Hamas, calls for the killing of every Jew in the world.
Yeah.
This is the people that rule Gaza. So they're extremists, they're not in a minority, they're in power, because they don't have a democratic system. They had one election one time, and that's it. They haven't had elections since 2005. In Israel, there's a democratic system, there's a free press, there's accountability, but the extremists are not in power. As much as you want to criticize Benjamin Netanyahu, he has never even begun to hint that he would advocate for the killing of civilians, which is what the Palestinians would celebrate in terms of Israeli civilians all the time. I don't think you can create that equivalence. Oh, everybody wants peace. It's just the extremists that are screwing it up. I'd be very wary of people who say they want peace. You have to kind of inspect which kind of peace they're talking about and what are the conditions. Hamas also says it wants peace. Only it's peace, the kind of peace you find in a cemetery.
Right. Michael, that last point was interesting, Philippe. I'll have to say, where celebration. You want peace, but on Netanyahu's end, he's never advocated killing civilians. There is proof out there, that Hamas leadership has has advocated killing civilians. What I was going to just ask, and then I want to hear Michael's opinion. Yes or no, Philippe? Yes or no? Do you, if you can answer in a yes or no question, though, is it though? Do you agree that a lot of the controversy is due to these small minorities on each end of the spectrum, and like them continuing to go at it? Is that an accurate statement? I heard everything you just said before, but I just wanted to go back the original question. Do you think that's no?
My answer is no.
No? Okay, Michael.
My answer is no. I don't think on the Palestinian side that it's a minority.
No, and I think Philippe is absolutely correct. You look at the number of people in Palestinian-run opinion polls who support what they call violent resistance against Israel, and those numbers have ranged anywhere from 30% to 50%. So it's not, fortunately, while it is an extremist group, it's not a minuscule minority. There may be some small fraction in the single digits of percent among the Israeli Jewish population that might hold similar opinions to the Palestinians, but they're not the ones who have missiles and rockets that are being launched, compared to what Hamas is doing. If the Israeli government had the same extremist viewpoint that Hamas did, there would not be a building taller than 2 stories that would be left standing in Gaza right now. You look at how Israel conducted itself while Hamas was aiming rockets at 3.5 million civilians on a continuous basis, and they could have gone in and really made Gaza look like Chechnya after the Russians were done with it. And I think that the way that Israel conducted itself in defending its own citizens speaks volumes about their attitude. And people talk about a conflict between Israel and Hamas. Well, what does Hamas have that Israel wants? Nothing. Israel's out of Gaza. Israel doesn't have any territorial designs on Gaza. Israel wants nothing going across that border in the way of rockets or missiles. That's Israel's goal as far as Gaza.
Very, very, very interesting. Okay. Why don't I move then on into a next question that I'd like to ask each of you. So I guess another really interesting thing that I'm seeing is and I guess it relates to the honestly over the past 3 hours, I'm seeing a lot of these conversations are turning into an idea, a conversation about who's occupying what territory and whether or not Israel should be occupying West Bank and Gaza, or if those two, territories should be left alone. What I wanted to ask you is, I've been in touch with a Palestinian woman, around my age, like 23 or so, whatever, and she's just like, she's very upset at both her own Palestinian Authority government. She places blame on them, as well as places blame on the Israeli government. Basically her blame for the Palestinians that she shares with me is corrupt government. They don't care about us. They use funds inappropriately, etc. They're not building out an economy and giving me a fair chance at living normally and excelling in life, right? And then she looks at Israel and she has a problem with Israel because she's like, I don't think they care about me either, and yet I'm part of their occupied land. Even though I have my own authority that we voted in, whatever, I'm angry at both. So how would you respond, to that girl where you're like, what can we actually do about this? What would be your response to her where she's, communicating this frustration to me? And how do we give this girl a chance to live a normal life. If you guys want, if whoever wants to take that first.
Philippe, you can go ahead.
And start. I can wait. Fine. Okay. I don't know who your friend is. I don't know where she lives. You said that those territories are occupied. It's false. Gaza is not occupied at all. We just got a question typed in about how can you say Gaza is not occupied? It's around, blah, blah. The only thing happening in Gaza from Israel right now is an embargo against weapons because rockets are being fired. The UN, which is probably one of the most hostile bodies towards Israel in the world, except for the Arab League, has said that Gaza, the blockade around Gaza is illegal and inappropriate. Hamas itself wants to declare certain independence in Gaza, proving that it's not occupied. People use occupation as a shorthand way of not dealing with the facts. Gaza is not occupied. There's no reason for the violence coming from it. If there were no violence, like Michael said, Israel wants Gaza. Now, if your friend lives in the West Bank, every indicator of quality of life increased from 1967 to 1994. That's why Israel administered every aspect of life in the West Bank. Life expectancy went up, child mortality went down, literacy went up, universities were built. Okay? Now, that's about Israel caring about the people. You could say it didn't care enough, it didn't care properly, it made mistakes. I don't think anybody reasonable would argue with those things, but it did care. The Palestinians embarked on an intifada in 1980, achieving some form of independence. They acquired that independence starting in 1994 on the ground. Since then, they are, by their own choice, responsible as much as possible for their own daily lives. And I think that if you look at the fact, since 1994, Palestinian suffering is overwhelmingly a result of Palestinian choices to resort to violence. In 2000, Yasser Arafat was offered a state on about 90 to 99% of his demands. Instead of even coming back with a counteroffer, he chose a war of terror where Israeli citizens, civilians, and children were getting slaughtered every day. That's going to have consequences on the past. Years later, Israel finally responded with defensive ships and went into the territory. That's a consequence of the violence. The checkpoints are a consequence of the violence. They weren't there before the violence. The wall and the fence were not there before the violence. In fact, the occupation itself was not there before the violence. The violence against Israelis started way before 1967 when Israel came over the territory. It started way before 1948 when Israel. So, violence, there's going to be consequences. If you're independent and have been armed as the Palestinians would in order to keep the peace, but you use those weapons to attack civilians, there's going to be consequences. In the world of adults, if you choose violence, there are consequences. The world has been infantilizing the Palestinians individuals, and therefore everything that happens to them is immediately considered an Israeli crime. In any normal setting, when you have independence or semi-independence, and you choose to use that to attack people for political purposes, there will be a response. Israel has every right and every obligation to defend my kids. I want my child to be safe, whether that pleases the news or people like Ibrahim or people like here from the West Bank or not. I'm not going to let myself be attacked and not respond because they have clever propaganda, which makes it always Israel's fault. It is not. If you look back in history, Israel never starts the problem. Never. Because it's just not in its interest to start a war for.
Right. Michael, I know Rim in the text box posted a few questions. Do you want to respond to any of those? Otherwise, I would like to ask you each an interesting question. Maybe Philippe, you'll be able to answer it a little more accurately because you're inside the country. About checkpoints.
I'll answer Rim's question.
I'm not inside the country right now. I'm actually
in
California.
But you live there. So yeah, Michael, go ahead and answer any of Rim's concerns.
Sure. Yeah. I would also like to address just first the other question that you posed, and I'm sure Philippe can second this. There are many Israelis who are frustrated by the policies of the Israeli government as well as the Palestinian leadership, thinking that the Israeli government handle things in a different way that may be able to lead to more peace. But again, the bottom line that comes out is there has to be a willingness on the Palestinian side to live in peace alongside the Jewish state of Israel, and every statement that even Mahmoud Abbas has made about that has been negative. Now, as far as the situation in Gaza, okay, as Philippe pointed out, even the United Nations pointed out that Israel's naval blockade of Gaza is legal. And I'm not using the United Nations as an authority, I'm using it as an example. The United Nations is so fatally poisoned against Israel that if even the UN can recognize that Israel's actions in protecting its own citizens by blockading the importation of Iranian weapons into Gaza, if the UN can recognize that it's legal, it has to be solidly founded. Now, do people in Gaza have freedom of movement? Well, again, this is a consequence of the choice of the Hamas leadership. The Hamas leadership was given the choice in 2007 to say, recognize Israel, agree to abide by previous agreements, and to give up violence. And they said no. Under what circumstances is Israel required to keep an open border with an entity that has declared war against it and backs it up with thousands and thousands of rockets that they have launched, all of them against Israeli citizens? You know, there's an Israeli military base that's located about a mile away from the town of Sderot. And while Sderot has been the target of thousands of rockets over the past decade, none of them were launched at the military base. These rockets are all a form of terror against civilians. Now, Gaza has a border with Egypt. If they want to go ahead and complain about how Egypt is treating them, that is not the fault of Israel. They can have relations with Egypt. They have a border with Egypt, and that's subject to bilateral relations between those two entities. But Israel is not required to open its border to a hostile entity. And let's keep in mind, when we talk about the Hamas, it was the only government in the world that officially mourned the death of Osama bin Laden. This is the group that's in charge of Gaza right now.
Okay. Very interesting.
Can I ask you a question, Max?
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you a question, Max.
Go ahead.
You said you're 23, right?
You cut out for a second. Can you say that again?
How? You said 23 years old?
Yes, I'm 23 years old. Correct.
Okay. The Palestinians chose to embark on a war of terrorism 10 years ago instead of accepting a very generous peace offer by Israel. They did that again twice. I have a friend who, by the time she was your age, lovely girl, loving family, warm family. She makes movies about coexistence. She designs clothes for art. She has Arab friends. She has Jewish friends. By the time she was 21, she had not witnessed, she had survived 2 terror attacks where her friends and civilians from her town were killed in the streets. This happened every day. I have another friend who lost his girlfriend at a restaurant in Haifa where Jews and Arabs were known to go together. It blew up and she died. I can go on, unfortunately, for a while with these kinds of stories. One Israeli has been spared this kind of stuff. And when that happens for 3 years after the Palestinians reject a generous peace offer without making a counteroffer, Israel absolutely obligated to defend itself.
Right.
Consequences that make the life of the Palestinians painful. Because Israel is defending itself, the root cause of that pain is the fact that the Palestinians chose terrorism.
Right.
If I'm sitting now in California, Mexico, if California decides to start attacking Mexico or vice versa, or California takes a fully blind attitude towards cartels going into Mexico and killing entire towns, or vice versa, eventually one of those governments is going to react. And it's absolutely to be expected that there will be consequences on the lives of everyday people. The real issue here is the absolute lack of any decent leadership on the Arab side, which causes violence, allows violence against civilians, lets children be slaughtered, and then when the response comes, usually very late and usually very measured, they start to complain by abusing language. It's Israeli oppression, it's occupation, it's apartheid, it's genocide, basically making fun of us. Emptying these important words of any meaning instead of facing their own choices and their own mistakes. That's what happened in 1948. Israel offered the Palestinians peace. It offered to help them establish the first state of Palestine in history. There has never been a state of Palestine. And the response from the Arab side was wage a war of you, and not one of you will survive in any independence war. And they attacked, and they told the people to leave, and they caused violence which made other people leave by fear. Then, when Israel won a war that Israel did not want, that the Palestinians did not impose on it for no reason, instead of building a state, they complain of a Nakba, catastrophe, of Israel's establishment. The only real Nakba is Arab leadership. The only real catastrophe is choices they make over and over again to disregard the good of their own people in order to hurt Israelis and then blame Israelis for that. And that's what's still going on today. Nothing of that has changed.
Right. So, if I could ask you a question, I've seen certain maps of like the West Bank, and it seems like there's a controversy or a question of, at least I saw it at least on this one map, and I'm not saying that it was accurate, but I want to assume that it was because it seemed like a legitimate documentary. But one thing I noticed, Philippe, is that these checkpoints that Palestinians are saying is disrupting their lives and like them being able to live a normal life, which you want to think is believable, because who wants to go through a checkpoint every 5 miles when you're trying to drive somewhere or whatever? My question is wouldn't it make them? I think the point of the checkpoints is for them to be on the border between West Bank and Israel, correct? So is there a reason why there are multiple?
No.
It's not to be on the border?
No, it's not just to be on the border.
Is that the most? Is that the most?
Border is the most important one, obviously.
Yeah. So is, in order to let's say justify peace and trying to promote peace, would it make sense for Israel to remove the checkpoints inside the interior of the West Bank versus and leave the ones on the border because that makes sense for security, but rather remove the ones inside the interior because you would have to think that the interior ones are disrupting people's normal life, right?
Yeah, they are, but the checkpoints don't cause terrorism. The terrorism is the reason there are checkpoints. Let's make that clear. There were no checkpoints until terrorism started, and the worse terrorism got, the more Israelis needed to check Palestinians transporting weapons in ambulances, which they do often, in school buses, in all kinds of means they had or have of transporting suicide bullets. Now, could Israel improve the life of Palestinians by removing some checkpoints? Yes. Should it? Yes. Has it done it in the past? Yes. Generally, the result has been more terrorism, not less. Because terror groups that don't care about the other Palestinians, they're going to use that opening to try to carry out a terror attack. These people are often directed from Iran or Syria in any case. The checkpoints that are between Palestinian towns are there because
in terms of the root cause behind that. I don't know what each of your schedules are. Do you guys want to continue speaking? Because I usually keep the conversations to about 45 minutes or so. But if you guys want, I don't have another conversation scheduled until 4 p.m. So if you want to continue speaking, I'm more than happy to.
I don't know. I was just happy to join the conversation.
Yeah, I can do a few more minutes.
Talk with Philippe here, who again, as I said, I've met by email, but not personally to this point.
Great. Okay, so we'll speak for a few more minutes, and you know what? If we're going to speak for a few more minutes, then I'd like to maybe direct the conversation a little bit more towards solutions-oriented, because that's one of the missions, that my site, by empowering citizens to speak about these issues. If we can direct a conflict like this around solutions, that would be, that would provide a lot of value. So an interesting question that I've yet to pose to anyone, and so you two will be the first, is what would be 3 things that you would ask the opposing party or, group of people, so for you guys opposing, Palestinian people, to, completely stop doing in order to, provide peace? And then Philippe and Michael, if you, were able to ask Benjamin Netanyahu, stop doing 3 things to then promote, a real peaceful solution. I know I wanted to ask that question obviously to a pro-Palestinian person, but if you guys can try and give me at least your take on the first one, which was addressing it to the Palestinian people.
Sure. Okay. Let me start here. Number one, okay, is the acceptance by the Palestinian people and its leadership that the Jewish people have just as much right to a state, to national self-determination, as any other peoples. Okay. So the delegitimization of the right of the Jewish people to a state, the denial of the Jewish people's ties to our homeland. The land of Israel is the only land that the Jewish people are indigenous to. And if you look at the history of the region, yes, Palestinians have a national movement. It started, a little over 100 years ago. The Jewish people have been a nation for 3,000 years in that land, okay? Recognize that, accept the idea that the Jewish state has a right to exist and stop the incitement against it, okay? That's number one, okay? Pretty much everything else is going to flow from that. Because if you accept that and accept that the Jewish state is legitimate, you're going to live in peace with it. The second thing that automatically flows from that is giving up this fiction of the so-called right of return for children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of the refugees created on the Arab side by the war that they launched to try to prevent the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Nowhere else in international treaties regarding refugees does the so-called right of return pass on through one's DNA to one's descendants. This is an example of Palestinian exceptionalism, and they are claiming a so-called right for 5 million descendants of these refugees to enter Israel, become citizens, and change its demographic character. Why? Because they don't accept the right of the Jewish people to have a nation. So that's why it flows automatically from that. And those two things right there, accepting the right of the Jewish people and saying you're going to give up on the right of return, would be those two take care of their end of settling the conflict. What would I ask Prime Minister Netanyahu to do? Try to avoid things that essentially pander to his political base in terms of timing. I don't see a problem with Israel building in that area called E1, because even the Palestinians in their negotiations with Israel have agreed that that area, along with Ma'ale Adumim, would remain part of the state of Israel in the eventual peace settlement. But the timing of that can be very problematic. And so that's what I would look at and say, avoid things that unnecessarily inflame the situation, because clearly the timing of that announcement was in response to the Palestinian vote at the UN. And actually, I would go back. Let me add one more thing on the Palestinian side. Don't try to negotiate through New York. Don't try to negotiate through Geneva. Don't try to negotiate through the international community. Ramallah is a 7-minute drive from Jerusalem. Abbas had claimed repeatedly before the UN vote that he was going to resume negotiations unconditionally with Israel after that vote. We are now more than 2 weeks after that vote, and there is absolutely no move to do that. Sit down and negotiate. That's my answers.
Great. Philippe, would you mind addressing the same question? 3 things you would ask of Palestinian Authority, and then, if you got 3 things. Yeah.
So I'll start with the no. I would ask him to resign. I'm not a fan at all. I agree absolutely with Michael that even what he does when it's legitimate, he finds a way to make it seem illegitimate. The timing of this announcement, it's happened more than once. He seems to be in 2 places at once. On the one hand, I don't think he really believes that you can have negotiations with the Palestinians, but on the other hand, he says he thinks he can, but he'll act otherwise. He's a leader, in my opinion, that has no vision, and I would ask him to resign and go home. With respect to the Palestinians, again, with Mike, I think the latter, which is the abandoning the right of return, would flow from the former, which is stopping indoctrination. I really believe this entire conflict boils down to indoctrination. If you look at how the Arab leaders were talking to the Zionists 70 years ago, 80 years ago. There's an agreement between Faisal and Weizmann, who was the head of the Zionist organization at the time, Chaim Weizmann. And they were talking about living together in cooperation. The Arabs recognized the Jews' connection to the land and that they could live together. Now, extremist Palestinian leaders, like this guy called the Mufti of Jerusalem, who was an associate of Hitler, went about systematically killing all Palestinian moderates for decades. Arafat did the same. And did you know that in the first Intifada, Yasser Arafat's forces killed twice as many Palestinians as Israelis did? So you kill all the moderates, they indoctrinate their people, and you can look it up on YouTube. There's abundant evidence of this. Mickey Mouse teaching kids to be suicide bombers, little kids with machine guns praising terrorists, even Abbas, supposedly moderate person who goes to the UN to talk about peace, his organization naming day camps after terrorists, making Jews into absolute monsters, such that even in Tunisia, people that are curious and have the courage to come and ask questions have these misconceptions about Israel. And if these misconceptions were true, I personally would fight Israel, if Israel were indeed the criminals portrayed as. The reality is, Israel is an island of stability and democracy surrounded by criminal regimes. Syria is slaughtering its own people with abandon. Lebanon is run by a terrorist group that's directed by Iran. Jordan is a monarchy that's basically a dictatorship that revoked Palestinian citizenship single-handedly. It revoked the citizenship of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and all their rights. Egypt, you see what's happening in Egypt. They're going from one dictatorship to another dictatorship. Saudi Arabia is a disaster. These are the people who are going around funding these campaigns of disinformation on Israel. And so Israel has to defend itself, what it has to do for peace, and what it should be doing better. The truth is, Israel withdrew from almost the entirety of the populated West Bank, and it got a tenfold increase in terrorism. Israel removed checkpoints, it got more terrorism. It withdrew from Gaza and removed every single settler. It got 13,000 rockets fired at civilians. I think people should be asking what the Palestinians can do. And my answer is stop poisoning your children against us. Stop this child abuse of raising entire generations of Palestinians to hatred and lives of hatred and conflict instead of lives of creativity and love and peace. Israelis in general, except for those extremists, but overwhelmingly, my kid goes to an Israeli school, very young guy. They're taught love, to paint, to play, and to seek fulfillment and whatever else we in the West find worthwhile. Palestinian kids, in too large a portion, are raised in hate.
Right.
And that robs them. It hurts them more than it hurts us down the line.
Right. Okay, very interesting. So I guess I'm going to leave you guys with, and I see that there's been some more some more viewers that have come into our room listening. If any of them want to join, that's fine. Although we're going to be closing this room shortly, so they should come in soon. Although this room can stay open if Michael or Philippe, you do want to continue speaking, that's perfectly fine. I can stay here and moderate for another hour until my next conversation. But the next thing I want to bring up is a little bit more related to Vonvo and what we're trying to do. The corporate media, the Al Jazeeras, the CNNs, the BBCs. I think it's well. All right, I'll take I out of it, but there's a cliche going that that the corporate media bias that comes with these networks is only furthering. It's only separating people more so. It's only pushing off the peace process even more so. I wanted to get your take on if you believe that's the case, and past that, if you think a platform such as Vonvo, where actual citizens with their own knowledge can come and have healthy, objective discussions, is potentially a better alternative to trying to work through these issues. And unfortunately, we didn't have another speaker on the opposing viewpoint, but I asked you other questions. But can you guys address each of those?
Well, the media certainly, looking at the situation in the recent conflict, looking at it from America, the media is unbelievably superficial, and in large part, it's because of an extreme lack of knowledge And in part also, not so much the American media, but certainly you see it in the British media, BBC reporting, a really significant bias against Israel that is deep and is long-standing. Okay, we don't see that as much on the American media, so I'm not accusing CNN or other groups of it. But it's so superficial because they're trying to cover this story in 1 minute. And the other problem is that we have a very, very well-established phenomenon on the Palestinian side, which Professor Richard Landis about 10 years ago dubbed Hollywood, which involves manipulated images, and the other side has picked up very well on that. The BBC reporter sent out a picture on his BBC account, allegedly of a child who was a victim of Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. Turned out that that was a copy of a picture of a child killed in the civil war in Syria. Okay, and images are being manipulated and sent around the world. And Israel doesn't get involved in that type of media manipulation. So the superficiality, the reliance on images, the lack of deep understanding all create problems. I don't think it necessarily impedes a solution in and of itself, but it certainly doesn't promote it. Now, to your other question about sites such as this, okay, I'll be real honest. I'm sitting here in California. I'm not an Israeli. While I'm very, very happy to promote the pro-Israel viewpoint, the way that it's going to help bring people together is to bring people like Philippe, who are Israeli, and bring together Israeli Arabs and bring together Palestinians. Those are the people who need to come together, because I'm happy to weigh in on this conversation. But if you want to look at something that's going to bring social change, it's going to be bringing those folks together. There's a group that's involved, at least you're probably familiar with it, on the ground in Israel on the West Bank called One Voice. And it brings Palestinians and Israelis together in specific support of a two-state solution, okay? This is a platform that could work with an organization like that. And if you're trying to bring people together for a goal like that, I think that can be very worthwhile.
What was the name of that quickly, Michael, again?
One Voice. Philippe, are you familiar with that group?
Yeah, I heard of it. There's some groups that
the
Seeds of Peace that does it with children.
With young adults. And it's based on a two-state solution. The paradigm being a Jewish state of Israel in peace with an Arab state of Palestine. And so it's really based much more, for people your age than folks my age.
Do you guys think ultimately, what's your view? Is it possible to have, do you think what's more realistic or more feasible? A two-state solution like Michael just painted, or a, one unified, I don't know, Israel, Palestine? Like, you can't name them both. So, like, ultimately, I've been questioning myself, like, is this just an argument over, obviously it's not, but like an argument over what name we can associate with this land? Like, obviously that question sometimes runs.
No, it's not enough.
I know it's obviously a lot more deeper than that, but what are your guys' thoughts on what is the best solution, Philippe?
So I'll start off with identifying the problem.
Yeah.
All these groups push for a two-state solution, that push for coexistence, are great, but the governments have to support them. This is about self-determination for two peoples. The Jewish people get to have a state in their ancestral homeland, and the Palestinians get to have a state in their home. And they live side by side, because it's a small land, but we're both there, we need to share. But the problem when you start saying a one-state solution is a safe, kosher way of saying no more Jewish state. That's a non-starter. Why should it be a 25th Arab country and no more Jewish state? And I'm sorry, in terms of just selfish interest, Israel does more good in the world, every day, than the 23 Arab states combined do in 50 years. Unfortunately, because of the way the government is structured. I hope that changes. And I think a platform like yours, now that the Arab world is waking up and wants freedom, and I know people from North Africa, because that's my background, are very curious, and they've been getting fed only one side of the nation so far. And I think the internet and their increased access to information is going to make peace more possible by changing the framework within which the information is understood. I wrote an article how Palestinian moderate artists are being persecuted by their own governments. Because as much as the government say they want peace and coexistence, when there's any voice that can influence the people from a grassroots level, they oppose it. Organizations such as One Voice and Seeds of Peace are not going to succeed if the Palestinian government is not behind them. And in the 90s, what happened is that Israel invested heavily in all these groups, and the Palestinians invested heavily in anti-Israel propaganda. And then Israel woke up one day and were facing a terrorism war. The Palestinians have legitimate grievances. I think a lot of them they should address to their own leaders, and they deserve independence. They do not deserve independence at the expense of Israeli independence. And that's what they're trying to get. Because every time they've been offered independence that's not at the expense of Israel, they've refused and they've turned to war. And I think that goes down to indoctrination. Geographically, the solution can be quite simple, it could be a bit more complex. I think the West Bank should be confederated with Jordan, and Abbas has spoken about that recently. And Israel should get some kind of joint security control there with Jordan. Jordan was created to be a Palestinian state. It's majority Palestinian. It's 4 times the size of Israel and has half the population.
Why have they been
governing the West Bank when it comes in?
Philippe, why has Jordan and other surrounding Arab nations pushed back when Palestinians within, let's say, West Bank and Gaza have tried to go to these surrounding lands? Do you know what the reason is behind that? I asked that of another speaker, and I didn't get total clarity. Do you know what the answer to that is?
Yes. These countries, what you need to remember, they rule by force. The people are not happy and not accountable to the people. They don't owe their power to the people. They owe their power to violence. A way to maintain power in a dictatorship is to deflect people's frustrations. If you keep the Palestinians in camps as animals, where they suffer real apartheid in Arab countries, Palestinians have no rights by virtue of being Palestinian in Arab countries only, not in Israel. You keep them in camps. You keep deflecting this issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict burning. You shift people's attention and passions away from the inadequacy of their rule. The king of Jordan is Iraqi. Everybody else but his tribe there and some Bedouins is Palestinian. He was put there by the British and is kept there by the Americans. He made peace with Israel, but it's on paper overwhelming. He has no interest in letting Palestinians come into what should be a Palestinian state also, because he'd lose power. So he finds a way to keep them in the West Bank. He revoked their citizenship. He closes the borders when too many come in. He refuses to consider Jordan as part of the Palestinians' homeland. Right. I think the West Bank and Jordan should be confederated. I think the Palestinians on the West Bank deserve independence, but not at the expense of Israel. And I think if they get independence, it should be in a framework where Israel can rely on security, and that means Jordan should have a role to play.
Great.
That's my opinion.
Alma was in our conversation earlier. How are you, Alma? Did you want to respond to?
I'm fine.
Good. I wanted to ask you, did you want to respond to either of Philippe's or Michael's points? And just so you know, Alma is originally, I think she's living in Jordan right now, if I remember correctly. She is Palestinian.
Yes, I studied there.
She studies in Jordan. Alma, yeah, would you like to just, throw out any points to them?
Yes. First of all, I wanted to ask Philippe a question about the artists who were restricted.
Do you hear her, Philippe?
Can you hear me now?
Is she there? I can't hear her.
You don't.
I wish I could.
Okay, Alma, do you want to?
You don't?
Do you want to type your question in the text box and Philippe will answer it there?
Okay.
All right, Philippe, look out for her question, okay?
Sure, I'll read it aloud.
While Alma's typing, I also want to just go ahead and Max, answer your question as far as the people who are proposing the one-state solution. And again, not only is it a failure to acknowledge, the right of the Jewish people to a state in a portion of our homeland, but look at the trend around the world. Years, okay? The Soviet Union fell apart into 15 countries. Czech Republic, Slovakia had an amicable divorce. Yugoslavia fell apart not very amicably at all into 7 different countries, or maybe 8 if you count Kosovo. South Sudan broke off from Sudan. the trend around the world of recognition of individual people's rights to their state. And yet the people who oppose the existence of the one and only Jewish state are pushing to create that failed binational state model that we can see the successes of in places such as Serbia and Kosovo, or Lebanon, or Iraq. You know, that is not the future that we want to see for the Israelis or for the Palestinians. You know, I'm standing here or sitting here as Philippe was and saying, yes, the Palestinians should have a right to their state in a portion of the land that they call home. It's just not at the expense of the Jewish people's rights.
Yeah, very interesting. And there's someone inside the room named Jihad that was pushing a similar interesting point. But let's let Alma. Alma, did you submit the question?
Yeah, I'm typing, but there's some problem. It doesn't type.
It's not.
I'm having a problem typing too. Alma, why don't you say it and have Max relay it to?
Yeah. Why don't you? Yeah, exactly. Great idea, Mike.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I wanted to ask first.
Nice to somewhat meet you.
Hello. I wanted to ask about the artists he mentioned who were persecuted or killed. What does he know about them? Who were they? Because I never heard of that.
Okay.
On the contrast.
Philippe, did you hear that question?
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I wish I could be on my victories now.
Okay, so I'm gonna repeat.
I didn't hear the question.
Philippe, I'm gonna just add. I'm gonna repeat the question. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Alma's question was, regarding the artists that you brought up before that were persecuted or killed. What exactly did you know about those people? And Alma just has never heard of that, so she wanted you to elaborate on it.
Sure, I'm happy to. The reason I wrote the articles is because very few people know about it. I'm part of an organization called No Borders Israel. And it's we basically help defend musical freedom of expression, artistic freedom of expression, or freedom of artistic expression, whatever you want to call it, all over the world. We recently had a fundraiser concert for Mali, and the musicians in Mali. Mali is a very musical culture, and the musicians are being persecuted by an Islamist attack that started in Libya. In any case, so through that organization, me and a good friend who started that organization and organized that concert, we started doing some research, and we found that there's a systematic persecution of any moderate or liberal artistic voice in Palestinian society. It's hard to get these documented. I had to have some Arabic documents translated, sorry. An example that comes to mind, this is actually not a Palestinian artist, but it was Palestinians who exercised their censorship, let's say. Bonnie Amis, or Bonnie, the disco band from Sweden from the 70s. They're a very, very popular disco band, and they have a song called By the Rivers of Babylon. It's a reggae song, By the Rivers of Babylon. It's based on a psalm from the Bible, where the Israelites are saying how much they're in Babylon in captivity and how much they miss Zion. This is 2,600 years old. It's a song that is very popular in reggae. It's a song, E-S-A-L-M, that's very popular reggae lyrics. And it's the most famous song that Bonnie M has. It's the biggest hit. And they're forbidden from singing it at a concert in Ramallah because it was gave too much credence to the Israeli perspective of attachment to the land of Israel. That's what I mean by indoctrination. A foreign singer cannot sing a 2,600-year-old lyric that is their biggest hit at a concert in the moderate West Bank because it lends credence to the Israeli attachment to the land of Israel. There's other examples, and I encourage you to go read the article. The documented, there's hyperlinks. It's called Speaking Power to Truth in Gaza and the West Bank, and it's on the Times of Israel website. So if you go to Times of Israel, just search Speaking Power to Truth in the West Bank and Gaza, or Gaza the West Bank. speaking Arab troop.
Okay,
And it's just Alma. And there's a couple of examples there, and most of them Palestinian artists.
Alma, what is your other question that you wanted to bring up? And I feel free.
Yeah. I wanted to ask him, like, from a city in West Bank, what's called West Bank now, and I wanted to know on what basis he thinks should be, like, part of Jordan. Why would we be part of Jordan? I don't want to be a Jordanian. I live here. I stay here. I love this country. I'm being educated here. But I don't want to be part of this country because it's not mine.
I mean, I'm going to add something in the meantime. Hamas last week shot
Philippe,
and dragged the bodies of supposed collaborators in the street.
Philippe, Alma was asking me a question. I'm going to redirect it to you in a second. And just with the two of you speaking, it's going to corrupt the video. You know what I mean? So...
I didn't know she was speaking. I can't see her.
I know. I don't know why you can't. I'm not sure why you can't hear her. Michael, do you hear Alma fine?
I do.
Okay, I don't know why.
I see her, yes.
Okay, no problem. So, Philippe, the question that Alma wanted to ask you as a follow-up was, on what premise do you think Alma, who's inside of West Bank now, I believe, why she would want to live in Jordan? What is the premise for why you say that? Because she says she loves Palestine and she would, like to...
No, I didn't say that. I never said she should live in Jordan. I don't think she should live anywhere she doesn't want to live. And if her home is in the West Bank, which she wants to call Palestine, and if it becomes Palestine one day, nobody should tell her to move. I've never even suggested that Palestinians should move to Jordan. I think Jordan... Well, I don't think. Jordan historically was created to be a Palestinian state. It was taken off of territory that was supposed to be Israel. It became a Palestinian state de jure, but not de facto, because it's ruled by a foreign monarch. It is majority Palestinian. That said, it is a state in good standing in the international community. That said, I think it should have a role in administering the West Bank with the Palestinians of the West Bank. The Palestinians of the West Bank should have independence and should have some kind of confederation. In my opinion, you asked me what I think is the most reliable project for sharing the land of Israel. I think the West Bank should be partially administered or related to Jordan because there's too much of a risk that Iran is going to come in and make the West Bank into Gaza. Islamist, hellhole, jihadi, Iranian-armed pool of war, and not a place that's going to better the lives of people like Allah. Because of Iran. Iran is funding Hamas to fight war against Israel instead of building roads and things of that kind. I never suggested that Allah should move to Jordan. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, she should have the right to live where she wants according to the laws of those countries. If she considers her home to be the West Bank, then that's her home, and she deserves as Palestinian to have independence. She does not deserve to have independence at the expense of the life of our children or at the expense of our independence. That's all I'm asking.
Right. Okay, great. Makes sense.
It was a misunderstanding.
Yeah. No. And Alma, did that clarify anything?
Yeah, I wish I could talk to him directly, but anyhow, what I was saying, that it was true that Jordan was created to be a Palestinian state and to absorb the problem of the creation of Israel, but that does not mean that we should be into a confederation with Jordan. And Jordan has a majority of Palestinians because Jordan is, if you don't know about it, it's a desert. It's mainly a desert, so only Bedouins live here. Jordanians are mostly Bedouins. This is why there are not a lot of them. But we were, like most of Palestinians who live here, were forced to live here. So I think it's their right to get back to where they came from, which are cities like Haifa, Akka, and I already stated that I believe in a one-state solution because it's not right that those refugees who were expelled and displaced should live somewhere else. I'm not speaking about myself because I'm from West Bank. I live there. I will not allow anybody to move me from there, even if I had to give up my life. But some people were forced to live there. There's like third generations of people who are originally from Haifa. They want to go there.
Yeah.
It's their right.
All right, great. All right, so
Yeah,
just because we're having some audio problems and we've been speaking for a little while, I'm gonna close off the conversation because I think it makes sense to. And Michael, Philippe, Philippe. First off, thank you so much.
I'd like to ask Alma.
Yeah. Go ahead. I know there's audio problems.
Can I ask Alma just one question before we go?
Yeah, can you hear her though? Because you're not gonna be able to hear her answer.
We'll try, but I think it's important. No, but I'll let you tell me what she says.
Okay.
I would like to ask Alma as a Palestinian if she thinks the Jews have a right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland.
Okay.
Does she think we as Jews have a right to self-determination in that land, in part of that land?
Exactly.
Alma, Philippe's question is, you heard his question, right? Because you could hear her, you could hear him, right? He just can't hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I did. Yeah, I will have to say my opinion once more. I'm a Palestinian. I love Palestinian for the diversity it has for all the religions. I really want a one-state solution for everybody to live in peace and justice and rights for everyone. Everyone has the right to live in that country if they want to, but there should be a one country that has rights and justice and responsibilities for all of its citizens. I do believe that country has major sites for all religious groups, including Muslims, Christians, Jews, or even Baha'is, but not Zionists, not the people who are racist and just want to kill us and move us, displace us, and expel us from our country.
Right.
This is what I think, if that would answer.
Yeah. So, Michael, just correct me if I say anything different, but Philippe, Alma's answer was she does think that you deserve the right to have that land. She is though against Zionist individuals who have racist ideologies.
No, Max, you are misrepresenting what she said.
Okay,
she denied the right of the Jewish people to national self-determination and called for a one-state solution with just rights for Jewish religious sites, and called all Zionists, which are people who seek the right of national self-determination for the Jewish people, racist. Please don't misrepresent what Alma said. Alma says that the Jewish
Zionists are racist.
It's actually racist. What she said is racist.
Yes. So Max, you're trying to gloss over what she said.
That's why you don't have peace, Max.
No.
Right.
So
that's why you don't have peace, Max. Because people who talk about peace don't think we have the same rights that they do. She thinks Palestinians have a right to self-determination, but Jews don't. And that's why you don't have peace.
I did not say Jews don't. I said Zionists don't.
Everything else, the guns, the bombs, the bombings, the conferences, the talks, the handshakes, it's all fluff, it's decoration. As long as they think Arabs have a right to self-determination, but Jews don't, you're not going to have peace. That's the problem.
Alma, let me put the question.
And I don't know how you can, in the same breath, say Jews don't have the right to self-determination.
Right, Alma, let me put the question to you a different way.
I said live in that country if they want to live in peace and justice with everybody else. This is what I said. And I repeat, Zionists are racist. They call for killing other people. They call for being better than other people, like other people are not human. I live there. I have to deal with them every day. And yes, this is what I think. If you find me racist for that, I'm sorry, but this is the case it is. I did not say anything about Jews because I believe Jews have the right to live wherever they want, if they want to live with other people with the same rights. This is what I said.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael. Why don't you go in there?
Yeah, Alma, there's a country like that where all people get to live together the same rights. It's called Israel. I want to ask you a question.
No,
If Israel were tomorrow, theoretically, to withdraw back to the lines that existed, the armistice lines of 1949, and were to evacuate every Jew that lived across that line in areas of the West Bank, okay, and even Jerusalem, and said, that's it, we're going back to these lines, we want to live in peace. Would you then accept the right of the state of Israel as the state of the Jewish people to live in peace?
I again repeat, I consider Israel is a Zionist state. I don't believe in the state of Israel. I though believe in the right of Jews to live in this country. I don't care if that country was called whatever it is called, but I believe that it should be a one state, because we will not give our right. And like millions of people were expelled from Haifa and Safad and Akka and Beersheba and all these cities. They have the right to go and live there back again. And there are many people who were immigrants. They can, if they choose to live there with other people, it's fine. If they don't, they just leave to where they come from. This is my point.
And Max, you have just had a completely accurate demonstration of what Philippe and I were referring to before as the obstacle to peace. Okay? The history is wrong. The existence of a so-called right of these descendants of refugees is wrong. That right does not exist anywhere. And this is what we were talking about in terms of the obstacle to peace.
Okay,
Nothing else. Land is a secondary.
So
Whether Israel builds apartments in E1 is irrelevant. This is the obstacle to peace that you're seeing.
great. Okay, so I mean, I definitely hear where both of you are coming from, and honestly, it would make sense maybe for our next discussion, because Philippe actually has to go. I don't know if you noticed that, Michael, inside the text chat. But
yeah, I saw. I will be very happy to participate in a future conversation. I don't know if you can contact me by my login, but Philippe knows how to contact me.
yeah. If you would mind, if you would follow our Facebook group, that would be great. And I mean, ultimately, maybe that's what another discussion needs to be had about this right of return. The idea of the two people living amongst one another, like that might be exactly what another conversation needs to be about. Because
I will be very happy to have a fact-based discussion on that. Absolutely.
All right. Very good. So
me too. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you so much, Philippe. Speak to you soon.
Bye, Philippe. Nice talking with you.
Michael
Bye,
and
Mike. Nice to see you. Bye, guys.
Bye. I still have a little bit of time. Would you like to continue that discussion, the two of you, regarding the history and the right of return and whose land? Because then that really does bring, ultimately, when I've been listening to, I listened to Alma a while ago, Michael, I've been listening to you. Ultimately, hearing that point get mentioned again, it brings up the discussion of people trying to create facts about whose land it was 4,000, 3,000, 2,000 years ago, and then all the way through now, and it ultimately just, if that's the driving force behind what you and Philippe were describing before, why there can't be peace, then ultimately people at both sides really need to be willing to let go of the past. It seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, but if that's the driving force behind it, then it's almost like people today in the 21st century need to begin to think about relinquishing the past, because it's not going to do anything positive going towards the future. Do you guys agree with that?
Well, I would agree, and if you want to look at how you're going to go forward in peace, considering that about 95% of the Jewish population of Israel, which means therefore about 75% of the country, opposes this concept of the binational one-state solution. Promoting that is basically a formula for ongoing war. Rather than peace. If you want to look at how you get from here to peace, it's not going to be a solution that one side is completely opposed to, because that's not peace. Now, let's go back and look at two things, okay? Alma had mentioned, number one, question of expulsion, and number two, the right of return. Now, let's look at facts. If you go back, yes, absolutely no question, there were some Palestinians who were expelled in the course of the war. Even Israeli historians such as Benny Morris are very, very clear on that. So there's no denying that point. However, more than half of the Palestinians fled without ever having seen an Israeli soldier, okay? Mahmoud Abbas being one of them. The Time magazine report from May of 1948 talks about the Jewish mayor of Haifa urging the Arab population of the city to stay, but Arab higher committees saying any Arab who stayed is a traitor. And the Arab population of Haifa fled. Many, many Palestinians fled war, as people have fled war for generations. Now, in terms of the so-called right of return, international refugee law absolutely has provisions for refugees fleeing a conflict to return when there is a peaceful settlement of that conflict. That clearly has not happened to this point. In addition, there is no precedent anywhere in any type of international refugee law to allow refugee rights to be passed on to one's descendants. And please don't quote UN General Assembly Resolution 194 to me, because the UN General Assembly does not make international law, nor is there any word right appearing in the paragraph 11 of Resolution 194 that deals with refugees. It says it calls on the government to allow refugees to return to their home at the earliest practicable date. There is no mention of any word right. So let's please stop talking about a right of return and talk about the desire, the wish of maybe many millions of Palestinians to live in Israel, but there is no right to it.
3.5 million. There are 3.5 million. Most of them were expelled from their houses, and the Israeli immigrants had to take their houses with everything it owns, the furniture, everything. The houses are just like it is. So I'm very sorry to tell you, it is a right of return. Many of those Palestinians still hold the keys for their houses. It is a right. When you were forced to leave your house under the pressure of weapons and you were expelled to somewhere else, this is a right to return. It is not only a desire. I would say Jews have a desire to go back to the Holy Land, they would call. I don't mind that if they want to live in peace and justice with everyone else. But denying the right of the return, I'm sorry, but this is very ridiculous of you.
I have two questions for you.
This is not tolerable.
I have two questions. Where do you get the figure of 3.5 million? The United Nations has a figure of 710,000 Palestinian refugees in 1948. Where do you get a figure of 3.5 million?
There are 3.5 million right now. I could send you all the resources and the documentation about that. Even the children of those people have the right.
And can you please cite me where this right exists in international law?
So this is a human right when you are expelled from your house under the pressure of weapon. If the law does not recognize this, but it still exists.
So therefore,
let me know what you would feel if this happened to you.
Yeah, Michael. I mean, obviously, I hear both sides going on. I know Jihad's entered, and I mean, one thing that I just need to put you guys on note for, and Alma and Jihad have heard this before, and that is that in like 20 minutes, I'm going to be speaking with another person on Vonvo. So I'm going to have to leave soon, but, you know, Michael, I mean, I think Alma puts an interesting point, you know, forward for you, and that is, you know, how would you feel, you know, and obviously it's happened, you know, plenty of Jews would say it's happened to us in the past. We've gotten kicked out of our homes, but, you know, Alma's suggesting that, you know, years back, her family got kicked out of her home. So, you know, in terms of, you know, pinpointing on that issue, how would it feel, you know, for you to be put in that circumstance, and how do you think you would want to react to it today?
Sure. First of all, if you want to have a conversation based on rights, rights are based on law. International law is based on treaties. So rights are not something that you say and therefore can have a force of law behind it, okay? So let's start with that. Second thing is, when the refugees were created by a decision of the Arabs both within the British Mandate of Palestine and outside of it, to go to war against the Jews to reject the creation of a Palestinian Arab state. And then you lose that war. Unfortunately, history has shown that there are consequences to starting a war against your neighbors and losing. There are historical consequences even in...
They're not my neighbors. They are my occupiers. They are my oppressors. They are not neighbors. They are people who came to my land with force.
They were, when the Jews came to Palestine during the period of the British Mandate, they didn't come in with force. They came, they immigrated legally under the laws first of the Ottoman Empire and then the British Mandate. Arabs also immigrated into Palestine. And what happened was, in 1947, the Jews agreed to share the land, create a Jewish state and a Palestinian Arab state. the Arab leadership refused and launched a war. Now, if you look at what happened,
is that a true fact, Alma and Jihad? Can you agree with that point? Because that's not that long of history.
No. Actually,
I don't.
actually, he's not describing.
So go back to that exact scenario and say how you believe that.
He said.
Actually, I will have to leave as well.
Okay.
There is no right of.
Alma, I'll speak to you soon. Okay.
There is no right of return.
Okay.
Thank you so much for participating, Alma.
Thanks to you.
Thank you so much. Okay, Jihad, you can go ahead and continue. Sorry.
Yeah, he said no right of return to the Palestinians, and I think he's way wrong in this one. First, the Palestinians
Can you
been
quote me in
expelled
international
by
law?
force.
Wait, Michael, let him say his point.
Leave me from the international statement, okay? Because in April 9th, 1948, actually they come and they attack a small village called Deir Yassin, which I am from Deir Yassin. Over 90 or 100 person, which is children, women, and elderly. They kill them with cold blood in the middle of the night, and they terrorize the whole Palestinian people. They have rumors. They spread rumors around the Palestinian villages, saying that we're gonna kill all the Palestinians who stay in their villages. Actually, they expelled the Palestinians by force and that by terrorizing the Palestinians. Okay, so don't say they have no right to return, but go read the history and go back to 1948, and you will know. If you don't know the truth, I'll tell you the truth. This is the truth.
I've read the history of 1947 and 1948 quite extensively, thank you. And I will indeed condemn what happened at Deir Yassin. Keep in mind that what was going on was a war. It was a war of, as Azam Pasha, head of the Arab League, said, that this will be a momentous massacre such as not seen since the Crusades. What the Jews were fighting for was to be able to stay alive. So this was a war that was going on. It was a civil war from November of 1947 until May of 1948. And then in May of 1948, the surrounding Arab armies invaded. Had the Arabs of Palestine not launched the war against the Jews of Palestine in November of 1947, there would have been no refugees. Even Mahmoud Abbas admitted that one of the two greatest mistakes that the Palestinians made was rejecting the 1947 partition and going to war. Mahmoud Abbas himself said that. Said the other great mistake that they made was
Mahmoud Abbas, he's a traitor, but Mahmoud Abbas, he's a traitor. He's not speaking in behalf of the Palestinians. Okay. I believe Mahmoud Abbas is not presenting the Palestinians. I believe Mahmoud Abbas and his group is corrupted people. They bunch of thieves, and they're not presenting the Palestinian at all. And the Palestinian is not. We are not calling here. In my opinion, Palestinians are wrong for calling Palestinian state. There is no such thing called Palestinian state or Syria state or Iraq state or Jordan. I believe the Arab have one state with United States together, okay, a whole country as it used to be before, as is the natural way for the Arabs to be one whole country. Now, anyone calling for individual state, I think he is not right, and he is not actually calling for the right thing to do. So I don't believe this statement about Mahmoud Abbas representing the Palestinians.
But okay,
yeah, I don't think Mahmoud Abbas representing. So if you tell me Mahmoud Abbas he's representing the Palestinian, I would say no.
But wasn't he elected, Jihad? Wasn't he elected by the Palestinian people to represent them? So I mean, if he's pushing these sorts of statements out, you know, it's your opinion to say like you disagree with him, but ultimately, if he's pushing those sorts of messages out, doesn't the rest of the world have to believe what he is saying?
No, actually, he is not. I mean, the whole election was not. We have no state first to have an election. When we have Gaza come with Palestine, with the whole Palestine inside, outside, you could say, yeah, we might consider this as an election. But what's election that have like 90% of the people didn't participate in this election? How
Right.
you call it election? This is election, yeah, for his group. His group went to the poll box and they elect him. Yeah, that's true. His group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because actually, they have no to represent the Palestinian people at all.
Okay, great.
Max, I need to go. I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk here, and I do want to point out, Jihad, whatever you want to, promote for, the Arab countries doing, that's fine. That's their business. Has really nothing to do with me, how they choose to organize their countries. But I would like to emphasize the point that, again, anybody who's promoting this so-called right of descendants of Palestinian refugees to return cannot point to any type of law or treaty that grants that right. And I think, again, this is what Philippe and I were talking about before. Anyway, I'll be happy to participate in the future conversation, and I'll log on to Facebook, and you can always contact me through Philippe.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much. It was great meeting you. You can like our Facebook page, and I will make it my business to try and, get in touch with you. But, you reaching, we have your email logged in our system, so it shouldn't be a problem.
Very good.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Okay, take care. Jihad, nice talking with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, Max. I think it's only me and you here. So
Yeah. You've dedicated some good time to Vonvo for one day.
yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your help, Jihad. I'm assuming your email address will obviously, be inside our system also. And if you're interested in taking part in one of these types of discussions again, that would be great, because I think, if we're all interested in one, solution, and that being peace, we here at Vonvo believe that it's through citizens having these sorts of, healthy, objective discussions that maybe we can make an impact and have that occur. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
All right, great. Thank you.
Talk to you again.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.